I just wanted to tell you that when I was looking at, and I was listening to some four speakers, I was thinking, oh no, what if we overlap? Because my presentation is supposed to be on student motivation and engaging students. And what am I going to do? Well, the problem is, I don't really have this problem. What am I going to say? And if it's something I'm passionate about, I'm going to find something to say and to bore people to death. But anyway, what I did was I changed the title of the presentation without affecting the initial purpose. So I tweaked it a bit. First, I said, well, engaging and motivating students and the things I'm going to talk about would also work face-to-face. Then what did I do? I made it more relevant for the times we live, and we're quite far in the 21st century, but there are still skills that are not, in my opinion, sufficiently promoted. We'll see if you agree. And then I changed the title even more, and I said motivating teachers to motivate students in and maybe for the 21st century. But still, it does not mean that I'm excluding student engagement and increasing motivation. But I do think that teacher motivation is related and can strongly influence how students react to what we do. Okay. I remember that Dana's presentation was, Dana's introduction was lovely. So I decided to show off even more. And show you some pictures about where and when I traveled, and it was lovely, and I could see the ocean. And just so you know, I'm not trying to cause any suffering. It's just because all these pictures are related to work, to my work. So a few things so you know who I am. I celebrate, I think, 70 years of teaching in October this year. 70 years if you count in dog years like I do. So that's quite a lot. I'm probably the most experienced person here. But that's not my initial passion in a way. So my initial passion was actually volunteering. So I started volunteering when I was 16 or so with the Red Cross in my hometown. And then I looked for volunteering opportunities whenever I had the chance. And some of them really helped me to cope with the challenges of last year, because some of them involved online teaching. So last year I was already prepared for this. And that's one of the reasons why I believe in the power of volunteering and in how much you can learn from it and from exposing yourself to all sorts of experiences. Before becoming a teacher, I worked in the news media, and I survived the financial crisis in 2008, which wasn't pleasant and totally not motivating to continue. So I'm very happy I made this change, and started teaching and learning about teaching and investing a lot of energy in my CPD. So since 2011 till now, it kind of feels like 70 human years too, if I count all the things I tried doing or I actually did. So yeah, this is me in a nutshell, my professional self. Now, let's see, what's the plan for today? Because I do have a plan. It's sketchy, and I hope I can stick to it. But before trying to stick to it, I'm going to ask you to ignore number 4 in a way. So I wouldn't like us to have, and we might not even have the time, to leave minutes at the end. I think it would be nicer for me and for you if you wrote in the chat whenever you feel like it. So if you agree with me, if you disagree, if there's something you'd like to add, or if you'd like to share something that works for you, and anything, just use the chat, and I'll try and check it every now and then. So first, we're going to tackle the bit of the issue of them versus us, in which them is the students and us is us. Then versus now, a bit of history of education, but briefly, I won't bore you with that. Then some good advice, which is not necessarily mine. So it's inspired. I did it in collaboration with my students. And what I won't be talking about is theories of motivation. I won't be talking about Maslow. I won't be talking about what Jeremy Harmer wrote about motivation, although they're really interesting and they're worth taking into consideration. Feel free to. All right then. So what I would really like this meeting we have now to be is more of a journey we take together, since we're not traveling anyway. It would be a journey towards a bigger picture, to get some perspective about what we do, why we do it, and how can we do it better. So the first activity involves you. I'll be quiet for a couple of minutes, which will be nice. I'm going to prompt some questions. Some of them might be quite personal, so don't feel forced to write in the chat or anything. Actually, what I would like you to do is just reflect. What would you answer? Try to be as honest as possible with yourselves. All right? So I'll start showing you the questions. I'll just do some proofreading because I have experience with that. Sorry. Maybe a moment when your teacher was unfair. How did it make you feel? Did it make you perform better? Love their class even more? What about a supportive teacher? Because I do remember moments of unfairness quite well. I remember my first 9th grade, for example, when I got the first 9 in music, and it ruined it. It was my first low grade. It hurt. It took me many years to forgive my primary school teacher. I'll be honest, I didn't. Lovely, Zamfira. I'm just looking at the chat too. Lovely, you're writing there. I'm happy you had supportive English teachers. Strangely, I didn't. I don't know how come I became one, possibly to avoid other students going through what I went through. But those were different times. Do you have a clue about that? Possibly if they had to write, for example, one word describing you, what would they choose? Not on a bad day, not after a test or before a test, but when they're honest and they take some distance. Just 32 more questions, bear with me. No, they're 9. I would really like them to pick me as the supportive teacher, but only if I deserve it. And the last one, it's a bit unrelated, but not really. It leads us to what I would like to share with you next. When I got my first job, I didn't even submit a CV. I didn't need to write one, and a proper one, I think, until I applied to a serious media company, news media company, or I started worrying a lot about how my CV looks like when I applied for jobs abroad. Computer skills, you didn't really need computers, or I don't know, you needed super basic computer skills as a journalist, or even as a teacher maybe some years ago. But I'm not sure this applies to our students now. I'm not sure they need the same skills that we needed when we were their age or older, but still young. All right. Now, going back, remember, I told you I'm not going to disappoint the initial topic, which was student engagement, motivation, and everything is related, you'll see. I chose two definitions I liked because they made sense to me and they supported what the message I'm trying to share with you today. So student engagement is when they feel they want to know, when they feel comfortable, when they feel challenged to an appropriate level. So they're optimistic, they're interested in what we're doing in class. That's when students are engaged, which of course is kind of sometimes difficult to manage, to improve, to increase online, but there are ways of doing it. And they're quite similar to what we could have done back in the day when we were teaching face-to-face. But then the definition on motivation is also nice because it focuses on three things that can increase it. So it's the needs of the people involved, the needs of our students. So of course we could give it a think. How much of what we do responds to these three items? Students' values, what matters to them. For example, I did some sort of, introspection game, let's see. And I was thinking about my values. So what's really, really important to me? Is it family? Is it money? Is it, I don't know, things like that. And my list had continuing learning, the power of education, feeling comfortable with my job and what I do, feeling there's a purpose to what I do, that it makes sense to me, it's worth it. So our values are important. And if we do something that's compatible with our values, then we're going to do it better. And it's the same for our students. And the goals. And personally, I do work on this area quite a bit from the beginning of the school year, for example. I try to teach my students to set realistic goals and to take actual steps towards achieving them. So not just, I would like to gain or lose weight, but okay, what am I going to do to get there? By when? Deadlines are important. Okay. So these are a few ideas. Let's take a look now. There are moments when what people say kind of echoes in my head because it feels like a valuable statement. And sometimes I collect bits of conversation I have with people because they're very, very, I don't know, they're useful to me and they give me clear ideas about what I should improve. So I remember myself in my first year as an academic skills teacher at the University of Birmingham, when I was really nervous. I was not very confident because it was my first year. So when people would ask me what I do, I would start explaining with using a lot of acronyms. I teach EAP in the business and management program with BIA, the Birmingham International School, and so on. And I was talking to a returning teacher, so a really relaxed and nice guy, who, when I asked him, what do you do? What do you teach? He said, I teach students. So I felt it was a bit embarrassing after giving an extended answer and all the acronyms and things like that. But I was very grateful for the reminder. And it helped me. So it was one of the guidelines, the informal guidelines I used in my work. As an EAP teacher. And then there's another quote which I stole from a training. I can't remember who said it. From a training I did this November, and I really liked it. Someone said, I brush my teeth every day, but I don't learn a lot from this habit, from this routine. So it's very important, I think, that every now and then we take a step back. We stop doing things. We stop looking for new resources or trying new, new activities and so on, and just reflect on what we do with kindness, what we do right, what we do amazingly, what we could improve, why not? So let's try, very nice. I took a sneak peek at the chat, sorry. Okay, so I have 3 more questions. Can you take a moment to reflect on them, please? What do they really need? What do they really need now? And I know the groups we teach, the classes, can be quite different. So if you teach in a private language school like I do, I work with small groups with students who normally have access to a decent connection and to technology. They have a laptop. Lovely. I love your contributions in the chat. Exactly. So they need encouragement, they need support. They need, and that you'll see in a bit, that's what they say. They totally agree with you, if only they knew. What do they really need? Of course, they need language skills, but especially when times are difficult, not just for us, but for them too. It's not a competition. We don't know for whom it's harder to cope these months, but it's not important. So yeah. Sometimes maybe they have quite precise and linguistic aims, and they just want to focus on that. They might say, I want to improve my speaking. I'm scared to speak in English. And that's relevant. Yeah. Nice. Okay. Next question. What is important to them? What do they believe in? They might say money. They might say video games. They might think they're also right, or they might be right. But at the same time, I asked my students what makes them happy, what's important to them. And you'd be surprised, but their answers were very mature. They said knowing their family is safe, their parents getting along. Yes, meeting their friends, seeing their grandmother more often, things like that. So family is an important value sometimes. However, we always get new students, or we don't have time to, it's hard, especially when you work with large groups, to get to know everyone. But just by using a Google form, just by asking them, what's important to you? What are the 3 values that guide, I don't know, your plans for the future. They will appreciate it. They will appreciate you asking them. And the third question, you already mentioned that, yeah. You wrote in the chat, yeah. If they don't know, maybe we could teach them. Maybe we can create opportunities for them to identify or to take goals seriously. I do lessons on SMART objectives, which are normally used in business, but they're used in business because they're efficient and they work because they're specific, because they have a deadline, because they're realistic, and so on and so forth. So I teach them how to write goals. I teach them about how many New Year resolutions actually fail by the end of January. So we can do it. Maybe they already have some set goals, especially if they're older, but it's okay to give them, to create opportunities for them to think about goals. Okay, now just a few pieces of info about education and public education, which I know people say, oh no, education is out of date, public education, but at the same time, it's not that old that people, young people, children received access to free education for all. And I'm not sure everybody enjoys this is a right, this is a human right to education officially since the 1950s, since the United Nations signed the agreement. But actually it's quite a privilege, public education, because many children in the world do not get access to that. And if we think about Romania at the moment, when classes are online, that too might look like a privilege. So education, which used to happen in monasteries, or anyway, it belonged to the church, it belonged to the rich. At some point, it became for the masses. When? Well, it had to do with the Industrial Revolution. So people who were illiterate, who couldn't read, who couldn't do basic maths, were not useful anymore because machines could do that. And that's one of the criticisms that are, in a way, often mentioned when people discuss the public education system, that it's built for factories, for so on. But at the same time, things are changing. Not as fast as we might like them to, but they are. All right. Now, lovely pictures. One is from about 100 years ago. One is with the largest group in the world, which is about 113 students. Of course, it's not the only large group. There are many countries where there are insufficient schools and teachers, and you might see this often. And in a traditional face-to-face classroom, we might feel like our class looks like this when we teach 35 students, for example. But anyway, if you take a look at the older picture, not much has changed, is it? In the way many classrooms look, many schools, in the way the teacher stands separately from the students, or very often just in front of the classroom and so on. Okay, let's take a look at this picture. They didn't have nice masks in 1918 when the Spanish flu hit the world. But not much of a difference now, isn't it? All right. Now, there's another thing related to traditional, to the old education system, or what some people would say would call factory education. And that is something I watched by a Swedish university professor specialized in linguistics and learning and things like that. And it made a lot of sense to me. So he was talking about rules and how rules can decrease student motivation, which is, I tend to agree with this. And if we think about our motivation as teachers, do more rules help us perform better? Science would say that not necessarily, not when we're qualified, highly skilled professionals, not when it involves creativity, not necessarily. However, it's interesting to compare this. So all the students are the same age. They're doing the same thing. Who cares what talents they might have or preferences? They're using the same tool at the same time, following the same curriculum, even if it's unrealistic. So that's sorted. Look, we have many rules about what happens in the classroom, and it doesn't feel like we're teaching students. It feels like we're teaching rules. If we take a look at this list. And yeah, the last bit on concentration, so all students are focused and on what the teacher is saying, that doesn't really work that well anymore, isn't it? But like I was saying, things are changing, and I don't fully agree with the speaker here, whose slide I borrowed. Why? Because in my case, rules work. What I do differently. So for many years, I was reading about routines, setting rules at the beginning of the course, so students know what to expect, and so on and so forth. But very often they didn't work. And I tried something a few years ago, and it went great. I asked them to set rules for themselves, and they were even stricter than I might have been, but also to set rules for myself. And you have some examples on the right. In general, they're lovely. Some of them are absurd. They ask me to say jokes in every class or to change my background every class. But in general, they're really, really sensible. So as you can see, they want to be heard. They want to be understood. They want teachers to be nice to them. They want teachers to like them or to feel comfortable with them. And that's something I also noticed with my students, because they often accuse me of being positive. And to be honest, I'm not a positive person. Yeah, but I'm happy to see them. I'm genuinely happy to see them and to spend 2 hours every week with them. And they can feel it. Well, they misinterpret it a bit, but they can feel it. It shows. They want equality in a way, so they don't want teachers favoring some students just because, for various reasons. But if they mention it, it's an issue we should consider. And just so you know, when these students wrote the rules, it was our first meeting. They didn't know me. So it was interesting to see that they didn't want me to interrupt them or to jump to conclusions. And, well, I'm trying to follow their requirements. But I also think, and I don't know if you agree, they reveal some student values or some student preferences, which are not absurd. Okay, what's next? Okay, I don't know if it happens to you, but or if you've heard other people saying, back in the days, we didn't have mobiles. Of course. I mean, for years, we've encouraged or discouraged our students to use to carry mobiles with them or to use them in class. And look at us now. How all the efforts of trying to persuade our students not to use the phone, what happened to that now? What happened to it last year? But the thing is, the purpose of education, and this is one of the main points I'm trying to make today, is to prepare students for the future, not for the past, not for the lessons, my grammar-focused lessons I didn't understand anything from in high school. I don't want them to be scared and quiet, because they won't be needing this in the future. We want students who are not afraid to speak their mind, who need to communicate openly, professionally, if that's the case, respectfully, of course, but openly, without fear. Because that's the world I mean, that's a more useful skill for the world they're growing in. So that's the problem. We can't travel in the past because we changed the present, so we wouldn't exist. So it's a bit of a paradox. Back in the day doesn't work because we can't time travel. And we can't travel in the future because it hasn't happened yet. So it's a bit, we're stuck with time traveling. We're stuck in a rut. We need to think about what skills our students might need. We might be wrong. That's the problem with this century. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what other challenges it will bring. Maybe it won't, but what if it will? So it's this unknown that comes with the future that can actually give us some guidelines too. So we know we're not preparing them. We know what we're not preparing them for. Not for last century, not for being obedient, not for doing things exactly as the teacher says, for thinking creatively, not for, do you remember the maths teachers wanting you to solve a problem in one particular way? And if you went rogue and reached the same conclusion as others, the same result, but in a different way, that was really frowned upon. How is that useful now in this context? Okay, so we need to think that the last century cannot match our students' needs because they need something for their future, and we can just do our best. We'll take a look at skills that are definitely necessary in this century. So, and another thing with back in my day is that the fact that it's a bit of a cognitive bias. It actually reveals fear of change. And again, is this something we want to pass on to our students? I don't know. Let's think about it. Next, I really liked, I could reason with what this guy posted on Twitter. And related to what he's saying, apparently we're going through a fourth industrial revolution. So this implies even more changes. And everything is happening way faster. Way faster. So I really liked this quote. Now, let's take a look again at back in the day. Back in the day, when I was a kid, I remember worrying about fossil fuel ending, like being complete, all the reserves being completely depleted. And that, I think it was also mentioned in the news media. That's how I found out. But guess what? The problem is we can't afford to burn all the fossil fuel we actually have. And that changed a lot in just a couple of decades. Okay, again, I'll show you how language changed, but a few years ago, we would call it global warming, and it sounded quite positive. I mean, if you don't like cold weather, especially, oh, global warming, that's nice, I'm okay with it. But then it became climate change, because you don't know, this phenomenon is actually more complex, so it's not just about warming, it's just a mix of changes. But now it's an emergency, it's a crisis, and more teenagers are talking about it. So maybe that's what they should be looking into and in a way preparing for, and also actively participating in discussions on solutions. I wanted to show you that climate emergency was the word of the year. Well, not in 2020 because that had it had robust competition, but yeah. So this structure was used way more times in the last few years. The words of 2020, they're related to the pandemic mostly, and to some events in the United States, like Black Lives Matter and things like that. But even people from Oxford were saying that it's really hard to choose a word for 2020. What would your word be if you had to pick one for last year? Give it a thought. But here are some words for 2021. Now take a look at clothiswear, maskne, vaccinated, but with a hashtag. Sharond, techlash, secession. Do you know, have you seen them before? See, yeah. Great points in the chat, thank you. I really look forward to reading it more thoroughly. Yeah. Change, online, rethink, home. That's a good word, Mariana. Thank you. Now, here are some other new words that we didn't need before, but here's their, just a second. Here's what they mean. Clothiswear, a closet and an office. Our office is in a closet. Maskne, horrible. The word vaccinated, but comes with a hashtag and you can't separate them. It's just what you do after you get vaccinated. A sharond. Are you a sharond? Techlash. When after you watch Social Dilemma on Netflix, you might feel like joining the techlash movement. And the crisis in 2008 was sometimes referred to as a man session, but now what people want to integrate in our vocabulary is a she session because it refers to how women were affected by crisis. So the world is changing, language is changing, and our students are not like we used to be. Words are disappearing, so not just various animal species, but words too. And you can find there extensive lists of disappearing words. Mostly, I mean, obviously those which have to do with gender, like man, woman, lord, yeah, traditional roles, and so on. There's a word I'm quite happy it's disappearing in France, which is mademoiselle. It just didn't make sense to me. So again, in France, people are discussing, when we address women, is it important, their marital status, is it important, or is it just a way of labeling them? So instantly after you hear someone is married or not, you might jump into conclusions. That's one of the debates in France. What do you think? Should we keep mademoiselle? You don't have to agree with me, definitely not. More, since I was asking you about skills before. Yes. Jobs are disappearing. And that's the conclusion in a way. We do not know what the future holds. It might be this. It might be this, the water crisis. It might be climate refugees, but definitely lifelong learning can help with tackling challenges that come to us and changes that we can't foresee. So lifelong learning for us as teachers, and also encouraging our students to do so, can be life-saving or professional life-saving. Okay, so as I was telling you, there are, and you can read more about 21st century skills. They were already mentioned before in previous presentations. So the 4 C's for learning, more critical thinking. Literacy, it's not enough to read. You have to decide whether it's true or false. And, okay, because I'm very bad at timing. Dana, can you help me with a bit?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to finish in 1 minute, okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. Okay, so these are the 21st century skills. And here is something from my students, what they want. And you also said it. When I asked you, when you were writing in the chat about what they need, I think you covered most of these. They want care and respect. They want relevant content. they want to speak more or to be listened to more, and pair work, group work activities. Speaking less, not like me today, but then we don't have over 100 student classes. So, but talking less and listening more, letting them search the information, that helps too. And last, but this is probably my favorite concept that I integrate in my lessons, is the growth mindset. Teaching students not to be afraid of making mistakes, understanding that they can be transformed into learning opportunities, and that everybody makes mistakes. Teachers make mistakes, so that's fine too. So this, I'll sum up now. These are the tips for my students. These are their requirements. And I will be sending you my presentation. There are some extra slides, of course, and feel free to take a look. Feel free to email me and tell me your opinion about some of the ideas I shared with you. And thank you very, very much for your attention.